So my two guides are my love for life, my love for the earth, my love for people. For me, human beings are not a pathogen. My own worldview has shifted with learning, experience, learning from nature, learning from people, peasants, women of Chipko, big university of mine, the Chipko University of Women Who Never Went to School, the top ecologists. So the whole world and its diversity is available as an invention in the perversion of US-style patent law. So the entire civilization's 10,000-year history is being put in the hands of a centralized agency to give permission to steal. So I would like all of you young people to get engaged in these issues, because it is not just about our heritage, it's about our life and it's about our future. People will have to be buying turmeric and buying ginger as pharmaceuticals, just like expensive medicine has become the biggest cost. But interconnectedness of every part of the body, you don't treat a part, you deal with the whole system. And that's why all Ayurvedic systems are living systems treatments. Well, the Vedic texts are not religious texts. They are poetry of the highest order. And I would say they're nature's poetry. I know the difference between a scientific discourse and a poetic discourse. The poetic discourse is mind and mind and heart all together. And that is why it is the ultimate communication.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the final episode of O's Verse series. Our guest today is Dr. Vandana Shiva, a physicist, an environmental activist, and ecofeminist, president of Navdanya International, and the list goes on and on. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Shiva.
Thank you very much, Shivraj.
So, Dr. Shiva, first of all, a big thank you for the work that you do with admirable determination and courage. You stand against the powers that be and the wealthiest people in the world. And that is scary to imagine even for some of us. So how do you do this? Where does that courage come from? And what really guides you?
Well, for one, I do what I love, and I engage in what I know to be true through my deep studies as well as my experience. And for me, truth has never been the lies of the powerful. They are propaganda. And for anyone who living an embodied, responsible life, it is very easy to differentiate between truth that is aligned with the way the world works, nature works, social harmony works, and the discordance. And Krishnamurti had said very clearly, intelligence is knowing the difference between truth and falsehood. So my two guides are my love for life, my love for the earth, my love for people. For me, human beings are not a pathogen. They are lovable beings. And just like organisms get genetically modified when the biotech industry wants to own and patent them, human beings can get mentally, genetically modified. And that's what we are living through. We are living through an amazing attempt to modify the human species, push most to extinction, and think you will be a superior species. So, I guess part of it is I'm a child of independent India, grew up with parents who were engaged in the freedom struggle. And all these issues were in a way taught to us, So fighting colonialism is part of the very oxygen which our generation grew up with.
And there are different kinds of colonialisms. You've taken on Monsanto, you've taken on Bill Gates. These are global powers with a lot of clout behind them. What is at stake for you? Where does the buck stop? And what are we really fighting?
Well, first, there are not many kinds of colonialism. There's colonialism. There's only colonialism. It's a totalitarian system. And again, because of how we grew up in our generation, where history was taught through life, through living people. I mean, I've of course had parents who were part of the freedom struggle, but the Sundarlal Bahugunas of this country, the Meera Bahans and the Sarla Bahans of this country, the Dharampals who have written a brilliant book, which I ask every young person to read, Science and Technology in India in the 18th Century, because we are brought up with the myth that science and technology are creation of the West, when basically they were taking everything from here, presenting it in Royal Society, turning it into an invention, just like they take the neem patented, take the basmati patented, take the wheat patented, take the haldi patented. I mean, we are such a rich country with so much knowledge and such long evolution of knowledge that there's so much to be stolen. And so when you ask me, where does the buck stop? The buck stops when we get a change in paradigm. My own worldview has shifted with learning, experience, learning from nature, learning from people, peasants, women of Chipko, big university of mine, the Chipko University of Women who never went to school, the top ecologists that I learned from. The buck stops with basically taking on every action that protects life. And for me, fighting is not the issue. Fighting is a side effect of a deep passion for life. Yeah. If that involves resistance, of course I'll resist.
Absolutely. And like you said, a lot of science originated from ancient times, from where we inhabit. Now, you refer to the fight for turmeric and against piracy and a story in itself. Could you tell us a bit about the US-style patent laws that you're challenging?
Okay. So, it was a meeting in 1987 where I had been invited because I'd studied what happened to Punjab in 84, what happened to Bhopal. And I wrote a book called The Violence of the Green Revolution for the United Nations University. That book got me invited. And there the biotech industry was talking about doing genetic engineering in order to own patents and forcing this on the world through the trade-related intellectual property rights of the GATT, which became the WTO. I wrote a book then called Biopiracy. I said, if these laws go through, then in fact, piracy of our knowledge is inevitable. By claiming what nature creates, neem creates azadirachtin, claiming it as an invention of W.R. Grace and the US government, then naturalized through the laws that were basically US laws. Now, how did US get created? US was a colony of the British Empire, originally East India Company, then the British Crown, like India. The British took knowledge from us and the Arab world, turned it into their invention, and then started to patent. So America wanted to get out of the British regime when they became independent. And they basically put a clause in their patent law, and it's built right into their constitution, that as long as it's the first time it's being done in America, it's an invention. So they literally lifted the entire industrial revolution from the UK and made it an American invention. And that's why, because of the American law, they can take anything anywhere from anywhere, and as long as it's an application to the US Patent Office. And that's why I feel, when they patented the basmati from Dehradun, or the basmati, which is famous from Dehradun, a company called Rice Tech in Texas. And I looked at that patent, I said, my gosh, they want to own the rice, the aroma. They didn't create the aroma, the length of the grain, because basmati elongates, and even methods of cooking rice. I learned it as a 6-year-old from my mother. I said, so everything is for, there's a patent of ConAgra, one of the great trading companies, for atta flour. How do you make atta flour? You take wheat and put it between two rollers. That comes out as cracked wheat. Then you take the cracked wheat and put it through true roll, and then it comes out as a flour. But now that you called it atta, it's an invention. So the whole world and its diversity is available as an invention in the perversion of US-style patent law. I had a book written for Penguin called Patents, Myth and Reality, which Penguin hasn't republished, but Biopiracy has a lot of this information. And for those of you who want to follow up more, Please look at a book we've done called Origin, which has taken my 30 years of this issue. Every law we created, our patent law, which says you don't invent life. Article 3J, that plants, animals, and seeds are not human inventions, therefore not patentable. Attempt to try and destroy it. A Biodiversity Act, attempt to destroy it. Please write to the Lok Sabha Secretariat. I'm happy to send this connection to you. There's a select committee that's been created around an amendment of the Biodiversity Act. The Biodiversity Act basically said, our knowledge and our biodiversity belongs to the communities where it is and the nation. And we said, you cannot patent, you cannot do piracy. Now they've changed the clause. They said biodiversity is just a resource to be exploited. And whoever is a bigger exploiter who through a patent can have the freedom to have a patent, and one authority will decide whether they can get a patent or not. So the entire civilization's 10,000-year history is being put in the hands of a centralized agency to give permission to steal. So I would like all of you young people to get engaged in these issues, because it is not just about our heritage, it's about our life and it's about our future. Biodiversity is the basis of life. Biodiversity knowledge is the basis of food and health. What's keeping people healthy during COVID? It's our knowledge of turmeric. The world, turmeric, ginger, they patented it in America. But if this patent amendment goes through the Biodiversity Act, then basically those will be legal in India. And people will have to be buying turmeric and buying ginger as pharmaceuticals, just like expensive medicine has become the biggest cost. So these are very, very important everyday issues. And for the future generation, the most important issues: what food, what health? What is more important than those two things?
And sticking with the idea of food and health, please tell us why you're against genetically modified. What is GMO doing to our population? Allergies, cancer, environmental concerns are cited as the main reasons to oppose GMO, but it is also said that none of the studies have been substantiated or really that conclusive.
Okay, my first reason for questioning GMOs is because I heard from the horse's mouth, as they say, that we will do genetic engineering in order to have patents. So my first objection to GMOs is the monopoly that goes with it. The intention was to create monopoly. The excuse later, I was there in 87 when they said this is to own the seed. It's to have a monopoly. It's later they said it's to feed the world, and then they started to spin story. Now I have lived through this whole period of spinning stories, and because I had studied the Green Revolution, I had already seen what industrial chemical agriculture can do to biodiversity, to our farmers, to the soil, to the water. That's what my book, The Violence of the Green Revolution, is about. So I started to stretch my mind. I said, if the same process of destruction of biodiversity and farmers' livelihoods is now the seed itself, is not just a dwarf variety bred for chemicals, like what Warlock did, but now is a genetically engineered variety with only 2 traits. They haven't managed to go beyond 2 toxic traits. One, a Bt toxin trait, like the Bt cotton, where everything is toxified. The soil organisms die, the pollinators die, every cell is releasing a high dose toxin all the time, and it doesn't kill the insect, because insects are intelligent, they evolve resistance. So the pink bollworm is resistant, you need to spray more pesticides. The second application is Roundup resistant crops in order to control weeds. But the weeds in America, half of America's farmlands are covered by superweeds, and now they're bringing more toxic and lethal herbicides, dicamba, and this is spreading through the winds and killing the vineyards, and they're killing the peach trees, and there are thousands of cases in America. So when you say the studies, well, look at the study of the World Health Organization. But biosafety is not just health. Biosafety is the health of the environment, biodiversity, other species, ecosystems, and our health. So I was fortunate because I got involved in the Biodiversity Convention. The government of India had asked me to help them, and I used to go to the negotiations. And since I was already aware of GMOs because of the 87 meeting, I started to bring this issue to the negotiators of the Biodiversity Convention. And then the United Nations appointed me to the expert group to frame a safety protocol. There's a legal binding treaty called the Biosafety Protocol. In India, we have the genetic engineering rules for biosafety. So it is known that it will have impact. Green Revolution had impact. It wasn't assessed. We said you shouldn't wait for the disaster, assess it before. That's called the precautionary principle. So the biosafety studies, wherever they've been done, have shown harm to biodiversity, harm to pollinators, harm to soil organisms, harm to the gut microbiome. This is all established. There's huge numbers of studies now. The issue then is, just like our biodiversity law is being changed by the same powers that 30 years ago were trying to steal all our resources and dump GMOs, and we created laws to resist it. Those laws of regulation are being broken right now, and you all have to be part of not letting them be broken, because your future. The Biodiversity Act itself, its amendments are free access. And the second is the biosafety regulation under the Environment Protection Act of 1986. The rules of genetic engineering are called the rules for genetically engineered organisms, et cetera, et cetera. And under this, an entity called the GEAC regulates. So this too is being deregulated, and FSSAI, which has nothing to do with all this, had just grabbed the power totally illegally. I fought a case many years on the lack of implementation of the GAC rules. And the courts have said, if the FSSAI misbehaves, come back to us and we will go back to them. But I'm going to send you both the invitation from the Lok Sabha Secretariat and the Select Committee to give inputs on the Biodiversity Act, as well as the FSSAI to give inputs. And for me, as far as I'm concerned, having worked on this as a scientist, having worked on this as an expert for the UN, having worked on the literature for it, as well as the laws for it, that both those laws, the amendment should not be done, and the FSSAI should not get away hijacking authority that doesn't belong to it, because this is a lawlessness of the most basic foundation of our ecological fabric and our social, cultural, and livelihood fabric. I'll send these two to you so you all can circulate amongst yourself. If you all need a little more guidance, I'm happy to provide it, but I would like you all to study it as your duty as citizens of this country and as Earth citizens.
And I think those open consultations are very important. But moving on to hybrid plant seeds, where is the objection there? Why do you object to that?
Okay, so the first kind of seeds are what farmers made in co-creation with nature. They took a wild grass and turned it into 200,000 rice varieties. Now, to me, that's the brilliance of breeding. Yeah. Or they took a mango and made it 1,500 varieties. Or bananas, thousands of varieties. Or wheats, 1,500 varieties. Now, we have had breeding now. Those varieties are called land races in the colonial literature. And sadly, the Biodiversity Act has that language. Land races are the seeds of 200,000 rices popped out of the earth without the farmer's mind intervening. Then you have the crosses like the Green Revolution, where the reason it's done is to take more chemicals. I mean, that's what Borlaug's work was, basically to push chemicals. And he's written about it, and it's in my book, Violence of the Green Revolution. The American seed industry grew through hybrids with the simple idea of forcing the farmer to come to the market every year. Hybrids are not renewable seeds. Yeah, hybrids have to be bought every year. Of course, in the first year, they have a boost, and but the point is that comes at the cost of a farmer who had his own seed or her own seed now having to buy. So for me, the economic argument is the main argument. I've watched farmers go indebted. I've seen tribal farmers sell their silver jewelry for hybrid seeds to get indebted. So, and hybrids need irrigation. Hybrids need chemical fertilizers. Hybrids need pesticides. So it's not just the high cost of seed every year, it's the bundle that comes with it. And then you have the GMOs, all of which are hybrid. Yeah, the BT cotton is a hybrid BT cotton. And now illegally there's a hybrid BT Roundup Ready cotton. Yeah. So the money gets made by layers of toxics, and they call it multi-stacking. There's some patented seed with 7 stacks of toxics. So it's not such a good idea when you know what seed is. Seed is supposed to give you food. Seed is supposed to give food to other beings. And a toxic seed isn't the best idea in the world.
And if you could just indulge me, there's this wonderful quote where you talk about interconnectedness. And if you let me, I'll just sort of, and this is a YouTube video that you did where you talked about when you design the world in the mind with deep recognition of interconnectedness, you will nurture those relationships. This basic recognition is what I drew, that is you, from my learnings in quantum theory, that non-locality, non-separation, interconnectedness, that is the nature of reality. So here is what I would like to further probe, Dr. Shiva, especially because our trust is working to promote an interdisciplinary approach to learning. The interconnectedness that you speak of, isn't that missing in our primary and pre-primary learning? Not that it is then that gets addressed later on in learning, but the crucial point being the early learning. We miss that train, and then can we catch up, only play catch up when it comes to understanding the big picture?
Yeah. So, on why we are missing interconnectedness. And then we go back to Ayurveda, the ancient science of life. It's based on interconnectedness. It's based on the interconnectedness of the world outside and us. Panchamahabhutas are us. Panchamahabhutas are outside. But interconnectedness of every part of the body, you don't treat a part. You deal with the whole system. And that's why all Ayurvedic systems are living systems treatments. And living systems treatments, therefore, must necessarily be based on non-locality. You can't have localized, replace this and replace that and toxify this and toxify that. When you said there are different colonialisms in the beginning, I said there's only one colonization. Now, there's an epistemic side of that colonization. There's a technical side of that decolonization. And there's a political and economic side of that colonization. But it is one beast. Yeah, you can't have one without the other. And Caroline Merchant, my dear friend, has written so clearly that you needed mechanistic reductionism in order to have commercial capitalism. You could not have an extractive economy without breaking the world up and breaking relationship. And that's the reason when we are taught, when children are playing in the field, or a farmer's child is learning farming from the parents, they're learning relationship. But when we go to school and learn the 3 R's, that is when our mind starts to get fragmented. And sadly, with this online learning, it's becoming even more fragmented. And there's so much discussion now on the side effects and the impact this is having. And I do feel just like, I studied the Green Revolution after the impact. I studied the GMOs before the impact. I think we need a very big group of young people to be studying the potential harm to the child's mind of just sitting in front of a screen. The child's eye, my son said, Mama, don't sit in too long in front of the screen. Just start saying no to the Zooms. Because it affects not just our physiological being, it definitely affects our brain in a deep, deep way. Absolutely. And when you asked about connectedness, I'm just thinking of the advertisement of Facebook's Meta. Oh, connection is evolving, and we are reaching the next stage, and next stage is disconnect. So totally from reality, live in a totally fake world, virtual world. Of course, it makes money, but think of the person who's living in a virtual world. What is their humanity becoming? What is their interconnectedness becoming?
And it's very important because it's our social emotional development that's at risk. Now, the Earth University, firstly, let me thank you for inviting those young learners to visit the university. We'll gladly do after the third wave is behind us. But Navdanya and the Learning Center, Earth University, look to nature as the teacher. It is a fascinating approach. But how effective is it? What does the data reveal? And also because nature as a teacher is introduced to adults and not to younger learners.
Well, first, that's not true. We have a lot of young children come. A lot of schools come when the schools were open. And they go back transformed. there is not a child. I'll give you an example. We had the children from the Mercedes school in Pune. And of course, the first day they came, all hoity-toity, and, they were looking at the simplicity of the farm. And by the second day, they were happy. And by the fifth day, when they had to leave, they said, we don't want to leave because, their luxuries and their expensive rucksacks and their air-conditioned rooms, it just disappeared with the richness of the experience. So I have always learned from nature, and even my quantum studies were to seek nature at a deeper level. But how did the Earth University get created? I was, I've been part of the Schumacher College, which is the first green college in the world. And Satish Kumar, who's the founder, had asked me to come and teach the first course with David Bohm, who was like a teacher of mine in quantum theory. He, of course, unfortunately fell ill during that period and could not teach. So I had to teach the whole thing. So when Satish visited, he said, Vandana, you've got to have a Schumacher-style college on your farm. And that's how the Earth University started. But going back to Schumacher, how does that exist? We had a brilliant poet called Rabindranath Tagore, who said, the West has learned from concrete. We have had our learning from nature. And that's why he created Shanti Niketan as the University of the East, the University of the Forest. And he then sent his secretary, who had come into wealth. And when the secretary said, what do I do with all this money? He says, you will start a Shanti Niketan of the West now and go to Devon and find a beautiful place where nature can be your teacher. And that's how Schumacher started. So anyway, Navdanya existed. The seed was my teacher, biodiversity was my teacher. And in a very natural way, learning for others fell right into the pattern. And we do hope some of you will be able to come, because the minute you learn from nature, you realize how limited the mechanistic Cartesian teaching is. It is so pathetic and limited in terms of what is seen, because it's got a blinding, it cuts off most of reality. It only has a monoculture of the mind, as I have written, and between the reductionism and the monoculture of the mind, it misses the world, it misses the relationships, it misses the connections.
And when you incorporate all this into early learning, what would be the most important lesson you'd add, and how will you bring about the learning, the reference to nature, the emotional learning, beginning from home, then to the primary education in all our schools?
I think the most important part about learning from nature is you discover your own potential to co-create with nature. Potential is my other learning from quantum theory. But because in the fragmented view of mechanistic division, I am separate from the earth and I can only be her master. That's the Baconian thinking. My book, Staying Alive, has a lot about it. My book, Ecofeminism, has a lot about it. But when we see nature as alive and thriving and intelligent, then you relate to the plant, you relate to the butterfly in its life. And first, you don't want to do harm, so you're careful. Second, you create your relationship of nurturance and care. Therefore, you become a co-creator. And that, to me, is the highest evolution of the child. To know, and I can say this not just as a theoretical issue. I started Gardens of Hope and I saw women become widows when their husbands were dying because of debt for BT cotton. And then I saw children committed suicide because of the burden of learning in school. And I said, something's wrong. We shouldn't have suicides. So I started Gardens of Hope with children in schools and the widows in Vidarbha. And, Delhi schools, Ranchi schools, Dehradun schools, no matter where it was, the first thing children would say, I found myself. The second thing children would say, I realize there's no scarcity. One little seed of tomato gives me thousands of seeds of tomato, which I can eat, I can share, I can save the seed for future tomatoes. What an amazing learning. In that garden, I say, you can learn your math, you can learn your geography, you can learn your ecology, while you also learn life.
And if you were in a position to revise the present school curriculum that's across India, how would you want children to capitalize on this whole connection with Earth and understand nature and interconnectedness the way you just described it?
Very simply, every school should have a garden. And I've worked with urban schools of Delhi who don't even have a piece of land, but on their terraces, they have created gardens. So there's no excuse. The second is, I do believe a lot of schools go out for excursions. Sadly, excursions have gone to Singapore for shopping, France for shopping. And I think just running on the treadmill of consumerism is very violent to the child because there's a rich world out there. And therefore, exposure to nature, just being in nature, being out on a trek, being on the Navdanya farm becomes very, very, very important. And this is not separate from learning. We've divided the world into, you go do that for holidays, So people ask me, Dr. Shiva, what do you do for off time? I said, I don't have an in time and off time, My life is always for happiness, joy, and giving. And I don't need a break from this because this is what is my little service to nourish the world, but then it nourishes me. So I think we need to start seeing being in nature as a learning.
And when you look at old movements like the Chipko movement and the Bishnois, why did the Bishnoi community react to it while that is not the case in the rest of the country? What in their culture makes them natural environmentalists? And what can the world, not just India, learn from the Chipko movement than simply romanticizing it?
Well, both were born out of disaster. The Bishnoi religion was created because there was a horrible famine. And the saint and the sage who created the 29 rules, Bishnoi means the 29 rules, realized that if people didn't protect certain keystone species, if people didn't conserve water, if people didn't protect the animals, people would be wiped out. And it is not an accident that because of this ecological religion, the Rajasthan desert is the most heavily populated desert of the world, because they regenerated the desert through the sacredness. And the sacrifice of the first Chipko, led by Amrita Devi, is because sacred means it's not violable. I will give my life to protect the sacred. I will give my life to protect the Khijri, and they did it. The disasters of the floods and the first Alaknanda disaster, and last year we had another Alaknanda disaster. It's like we haven't learned. And tragically, the disaster of 2021 in Uttarakhand was exactly in the same village where women had started Chipko, Reni, with Gaura Devi. The Alaknanda disaster led them to understand that the forests have to be protected. And then, of course, different streams fed in, the Mira Behan, the Sarla Behan, the Sudarlal Baguna, all of it added. Because we are interconnected, we should not look at atomistic history of movements. Just like a stream grows, like Ganga has the Bhagirathi, the Mandakini, the Alaknanda, the Yamuna, and it becomes the massive Ganga. Every change has streams. And wherever there are convergent streams, they become bigger. And wherever there's a discordance, they dry up. And I see the desiccation and desertification of the land as a reflection of the desertification of the heart and the mind.
And now ecofeminism. So ecofeminism today has evolved and branched into many things since you co-authored the book with Maria Mes. When you were writing the book, did you anticipate this developing as a movement, or did you intend for it to be what it is today?
Well, before ecofeminism, the book, I'd written Staying Alive, and it was based on my talk at the Mexican Women's Summit, where I was connecting women and nature, because I'd been involved with Chipko, that was, 85 was that meeting. And I'd been involved with Chipko from the 70s. So that's when the Kali for Women asked me to write the book, Staying Alive. And the book, Staying Alive, and Maria's Capitalist Patriarchy on a World Scale, or Capital Accumulation of Us, became bestsellers for Zed. And they said, can you write a book together? Now, both of us had evolved our thinking through movements. So therefore, it was not for us, will it lead to a movement? It had grown from a movement, and anything that grows from a movement must become bigger movements. We then went through a stage where, young women who were inspired by our writings would join universities, head women's studies department, and then the assault started. And, now, Maria was retired. I'd given up my job in IIM in 1982. So I didn't have anything to lose, but the young women who were getting inspired were losing their jobs. And then suddenly, about 5 years ago, men have become ecofeminists, indigenous people are understanding, because what is ecofeminism? But questioning the blindness of nature is dead and we create, and women are stupid and we are intelligent. Now, those are two bad assumptions. So just getting rid of it, there's so many streams of humanity that relate. So nature's very living. Women have a different kind of intelligence, and not just a different kind. Some of the best scientists have been women, but indigenous people, workers, farmers are starting to realize capitalist patriarchy's myth aren't the way we have to think about the world.
And what about the critiques of ecofeminism? Some have gone out of the way of calling it a bit regressive and patriarchal. How do you react to that?
How can a critique of capitalist patriarchy be patriarchal? You should ask the question to them.
And Dr. Shiva, also tell us the work of Navdanya and your colleagues who are working with you.
Well, I began alone. In 87, I started to save seeds. Till 91, I went personally village to village collecting seeds. Then I realized it was bigger work, and 91, the globalization hit and things started to change. So I realized I had to form an organization, started with 3 people. And today we have a much bigger set of colleagues, but they're not uniform and they're not in one place. And most of the people in the Navdanya network are farmers themselves. They're not staff, they're not employees, they are partners, and they lead the movement. And right now, while, I'm talking to you, we're having all the coordinators from across the country planning their work for the next 10 years. And of course, because we are very multifaceted, we do the farm, we save the seeds, we do agroecology. When farmers wanted support to do marketing, a new institution was created for them to help organic farmers do their marketing. So we do everything. I mean, that's the beauty of responding to life. Whatever has to be done, has to be done. When you're taking care of your baby, when the baby is crying for hunger, you feed the baby. When the nappy is wet, you change the nappy. You don't say, no. Now's your time to eat. You respond. And to be responsive to society and a living nature means you have to adapt constantly. You have to adapt. And because I never believed that money makes the mayor go, I believe that compassion, love, solidarity is what makes movements grow. That's what I have focused on always.
And I remember from one of your interviews that you said a trek had changed your view on things. You went on a trek before going away to pursue your academic research. But what you saw made you stay back and fight. What is it about nature that is so compelling that you had to take action immediately?
Well, I grew up in the Himalayan forest. My father was a forest conservator. I had seen forests intact year after year, trek after trek. And then this trek I made just before leaving for Canada is when I first saw the forest I'd gone to, not there. A stream I used to swim in, not there. And that's what was like a biological shock to me, that part of me had been amputated. And that's when I started to look. And I found out about CHIPCO, and I then became a volunteer for every vacation. I didn't stay back. I went, but I came back every vacation, winter, summer, winter, summer. And CHIPCO shaped my life. CHIPCO shaped my thinking. CHIPCO shaped my my paradigm. So what's so compelling about nature? When you know you depend on nature. You see, part of the colonial arrogance was an illusion of separation. They were still using nature, not that, just that. I've done so many studies in my 50 years now of this work. The more they say we'll be free of nature, the more they grab invisibly. Yeah. And even for the young people who are fascinated with the electric car, just look at the ecological footprint. If you think you're relieving the earth of a burden, no, you're putting a bigger burden.
Now, you've quoted from ancient Indian literature. If these texts were approached without the religious veil, rather like how the Greco-Roman literature is accessed, where the acceptance is quick and liberal, would it be more beneficial, the religious identity these texts are now wrapped in? I'm wondering if that is bringing the knowledge it holds within into disrepute.
Well, the Vedic texts are not religious texts. They are poetry of the highest order. And I would say they're nature's poetry. And the fact that I started to read them was because I, of course, was talking to a world community, but I wanted to be rooted. I didn't grow up. I mean, my parents were deeply spiritual, but not at all religious. And we had no religious ceremonies, nothing in our family, but deeply spiritual. But the Vedic texts are universal texts. They're universal texts, and they are as universal as when we turn to the Greek and Roman text. And I think what's got messed up is the later institutionalization. And if you notice, the discourse on religion, religious fundamentalism, never cites the Vedas. Never. They don't cite that inclusiveness. They don't cite the wisdom. No, there's a, the Vedas as ecological poetry is what has been, if you read the Rig Veda, what they write about water, what they write about healing plants, or the Taittiriya Upanishad, what they write about food. This is ecology. This is ecology. There's no baggage on it. There's no baggage.
And now, despite the internet era where the scope for knowledge transmission and sharing is so vast and unexplored, we still live in a world where there is an East-West divide, the art and science divide. Can this be mitigated? How can this be mitigated?
Well, I think all divides are constructs in an interconnected world, since everything is interconnected. Yeah, the West has been shaped by us, but it's that denial that then creates the divide. I mentioned how this claim that science technology emerged in England. No, it was taken from here. And do read Dharampal. Do read Dharampal's Science and Technology in the 18th century. It's purely archival records of the East India, of the India Office Library. Yeah, no commentary, just writing, copying by hand. He wrote everything down. What the British were reporting after taking it from here. Everyone's obsessed with vaccines now. You know where vaccination started? This land. Smallpox variolation used to be done in this country, and it was as good as 99% successful. It was reported back. And then once they developed a commercial vaccine, it was banned in, the original practice was banned in India so much, The reason I fought biopiracy is you take a seed, you make it yours, and then you ban it where it emerged. And this has been the pattern of colonialism. So all these divides are artificial divides. And what we need to see is the continuity, the historical linkages, and so much colonialism distorted history. But we are sadly distorting our own history too, with a lot of bigger,
And the linkages are important. Now, we're almost running out of time.
Yeah, we need to be wrapping up, man. Yeah.
Yes, and I know that you alluded to Tagore's poetry. So this is of particular interest to O. Tagore's poetry played a role in inspiring the Earth University, and you just alluded to that as well. Let's look at poetry. What role does poetry play in your life?
Well, I don't write poetry. I don't write poetry at all. But I know the difference between a scientific discourse and a poetic discourse. The poetic discourse is mind and mind and heart all together. And that is why it is the ultimate communication. And let me end by citing a poem that was sent to me when I started saving seeds. And it's a very powerful poem from Palestine. Destroy. Destroy our land, destroy our books, destroy our homes, destroy everything that we have. Destroy the trees and the birds till no insect and bird can hide. Do that and more. I do not fear your tyranny. I do not despair ever, because I save a seed that I will grow and plant again.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. And I'm hoping that this conversation will sow the seed for a lot of more understanding and maybe even a lot of learning for young people. But keeping in line with O's spirit, we have a small gift for you, Dr. Shiva, from a young and talented metal artist, Suraj, who runs a metal art studio by the name Craft Tune Light. So we request our viewers to please have a look at Suraj's work. We have all the details here in the description for you. Please stop gifting plastic. We have great artists, and sustainability should be our lifestyle, not just a mantra. But because we're hit by this pandemic, Dr. Shiva, our chat is online. Our only option then is to have to courier it to you and not hand it to you. But thank you so much for your time and your valuable insight and the inspiration that you offer us through the Earth University and the open offer for all of us to visit. Thank you.
Thank you.